Mackie in Southsea. I think there's an extra C in there somewhere. I don't know how to pronounce it. But they say, given the Rupert Lowe drama, what do you think the future looks like for Reform and Farage? Now, a bit of background for those who haven't been following the Reform UK drama over the last week. This is about Great Yarmouth MP Rupert Lowe, who is a fifth, or was a fifth, of Reform UK's MPs. He's been suspended from the party over an allegation of verbal threats made to the party chairman. This is a very tawdry tale, but this then prompted a police investigation. Lowe has been suspended for the last 7 days, which have been very messy. And in the interim, there have been additional claims from within the party of, quote, serious bullying and targeting of female staff. Lowe has described himself as the victim of a political assassination and denies any wrongdoing. George, of course this involves Nigel Farage as well. How does he fit into all of this?
It's a power struggle. Reform is an autocracy, not a democracy. And Rupert Lowe had given an interview saying Nigel Farage is not the messiah. Of course, Elon Musk had previously argued that Lowe should become leader of Reform. There have been long-running sort of simmering tensions between Rupert Lowe and Nigel Farage. I mean, there was a very telling moment in Parliament where Rupert Lowe couldn't even bring himself to name Nigel Farage as one of the co-sponsors of a bill he was putting forward. He named all the other Reform MPs, so that was a tell. And now all these tensions have exploded to the surface. But as far as I can see, there's one winner. It's Nigel Farage. Rupert Lowe was never going to be able to beat him. And I think Reform's future prospects hinge far more on how the government does, how the Conservatives perform, than they do on this civil war. We've seen many civil wars before in parties that Farage has led, and this is just the latest one.
Well, Andrew, as George said, Rupert Lowe is the latest in a quite a long line of rivals, I guess, to fall out with Nigel Farage. Is this a coincidence, or does it point to a wider problem with the man himself, particularly as a party leader?
I was talking recently to a very senior, very right-wing Conservative, somebody absolutely on the right of the party, the kind of person you would think might be drifting towards Reform. And I said to him, what's the prospects, do you think, for some kind of rapprochement or alliance, if not merger, with Reform? And he said, absolutely zero. He said, the man is a beech tree. And I said, you what? He said, yes, Nigel Farage is a beech tree. And I said again, what? He said, have you ever looked under a beech tree? Nothing grows. And I think there's a truth in that. I think Nigel Farage is the kind of leader who feels it has to be about him. He is an extraordinarily successful, popular voice in the country. He has, the gift of tongues, as it were. But he doesn't like people nudging up against him on one elbow or the other elbow. And the problem with Rupert Lowe has been going back quite a long time now. There have been very, very angry exchanges as well in the Commons voting lobbies between the two of them. I think this is a story which both doesn't matter at all and also matters very much. It doesn't matter at all because it's basically, two men getting really, really angry with each other.
Oh, and it's spilled out on social media, didn't it? It's so unedifying.
So what? So what? But it really does matter because an awful lot of British politics at the moment is based on the predication that Reform is the great threat to the established parties. You can see Kemi Badenoch changing her views on immigration and deportation and so forth with one eye on Reform. You can see the Keir Starmer government also looking at Reform the entire time as they think about welfare, they think about paying for the defence spending by cutting overseas aid, Reform voters, etc., etc., etc. Now, if this is a moment when Reform starts to stumble, then that will change the entire dynamic of the next few years. I think it's too early to say that. I would agree with George on that.
George, has the row caused a bit of a split amongst Reform members, or do we not know? I mean, it's just that Rachel Cunliffe, our colleague, obviously spoke with Ben Habib, the former deputy leader of Reform. During that conversation, he accused the party of being the Nigel dog and pony show. And he said that Farage's fixation on retaining control, essentially at all costs, was holding Reform back. Do you think, I mean, there are only 5 MPs, but are there signs of a split emerging at all?
I think it'd be more of a schism than a split. I think the reality is the majority of Reform members and then the overwhelming majority of Reform voters see it as the Nigel Farage party, and they're broadly happy with that. But there are some tensions that Rupert Lowe has actually positioned himself to the right of Nigel Farage on immigration. Quite an achievement, you might say, calling for a more radical deportation programme. I mean, Nigel Farage he's always made this argument. He made it when Jason Cowley interviewed him for the New Statesman last year during the election, and he said, I've done more to defeat the far right than anyone else. By that, he meant that UKIP's rise coincided with the decline of the BNP, and that he has always tried to avoid more openly sort of fascist far-right elements pursuing entryism and capturing parties he leads. And so at its heart, this is an argument about internal democracy and political positioning. And yes, you could see a party emerge, perhaps to reforms right, perhaps more akin to some of those you see in Europe, more overtly fascist. I don't think it would get anywhere electorally, though.
Andrew, I mean, most people won't even have heard of Rupert Lowe. What does he stand for? Is it something fundamentally different?
No, it's not something fundamentally different. But again, George is absolutely right. He has achieved the position of being to the right of Nigel Farage, particularly around immigration and issues of multiculturalism and all of that. Just a couple of things I'd add. I think that Farage would say, look, I have to retain huge amounts of control because I'm doing something that no other party leader in Britain has even dreamt of doing. I'm taking a small start-up and trying to take it all the way to being the governing party of the UK in just a very few years. That is incredibly difficult. And to do that, I have to retain control over my candidates. We've got another Reform candidate saying unspeakable things this week, but I have to maintain control of the candidates to ensure that I don't become so disreputable that, centre-right opinion turns away from me. It's very, very hard. You don't fully understand. I think if I was him, one of the things that would be worrying me is signs that people like Elon Musk, who has got lots of money and desperately still does want to intervene in British politics. Though, interestingly, I think his star is falling a bit in Washington, is talking about supporting a different right-wing party, looking around for a different right-wing party in the UK. That is not reform. Now, that will get all sorts of people, like Rupert Lowe, perhaps like Dominic Cummings, pricking their ears up thinking, is this a chance? And if, as it were, the splinter to the right of the Conservative Party itself does begin to splinter and not, as George says, merely schism, then I think that will change the entire dynamic of British politics.
Okay, one-word answer from both of you then. This is... To round this off, I guess, Suge298 asks, will the Reform Party survive? I'll put a time frame on that. 5 years.
Yes.
Yes.